Hi, I'm Adam Knippa, a design engineer here at Estes Industries. Today we're going to walk through the build of the new Pro Series 2 Vogel model rocket. This impressive kit stands 64.5 inches tall and is built for high-performance flights. It can soar upwards of 2,000 feet on our largest motors from an F-15-0 to an F-15-6 when staged. In a single stage configuration, you can launch it with motors ranging from a D12 reaching up to 300 feet, all the way to a level 1 high power certification motor, which can push it past 3,000 feet. One of the standout features of this kit is its unique booster recovery system. The booster has a built-in hatch door that houses its parachute, allowing it to deploy smoothly when the rocket stages, ensuring a controlled and reliable descent. I'm excited to get started on this build, so let's jump in. So the first thing that we're going to be doing in our build is verifying that all the parts of this kit are present. Here you can see we have all the parts laid out on the table. I've checked to make sure that everything's there. And the next thing that we're going to be doing is making sure we have all our necessary build supplies. So let's do that now. So here, just towards the top of the front page of the instructions, we can see our supplies list. And I want to make sure that I have all those supplies on hand before starting the build. So here I can see I have all the supplies necessary laid out in front of me, and we're ready to start building. All right, so the first part of this build that we're going to be working on is the upper stage engine mount assembly. So I have my pencil, I have my ruler, let's get going. So first thing that I see that I need to do is I need to mark a line at the 1.75 inch mark and then the 5.5 inch mark. So I'm measuring it out with a ruler, putting a mark at 1.75 inches and then 5.5 inches. So that's the points that I'm going to be putting my centering rings. Now, to get the centering rings for the upper stage, you'll see that the bags are actually separated, so that way you have the fins and centering rings for the upper stage, and for the booster respectively, you have the booster centering rings, the booster fins, and then some of the other booster components are also in a separate bag. So let's use our pair of scissors. We're going to open up this bag for the centering rings. Get those parts out. We're going to set aside the fins for now. We'll come back to those later. And what I want to do now is I want to actually check the fit of these centering rings. We want to make sure that they're not too tight on the engine mount tube. And as I can see, sliding those on, they fit nice, they fit good. So now I can actually go forward with gluing my centering rings into place. The first one that we're going to be gluing on is this aft one, which doesn't have the little notch that you see here. That notch is going to come into play later on whenever we're working with the Kevlar, or in this case, aramid cord. And I am going to be gluing that on now. So I have Type Bond 2, which you can buy at estesrockets.com, and we're going to be applying a small bead just above that 1.75 inch mark. So I'm just going to gently roll the tube around as I'm applying this bead of glue. And another thing you can do, you can extend that line that we marked all the way around the circumference of the tube. And that can actually be beneficial at times whenever you're building the kit. It can help you make sure the centering ring is good and properly level per se. So I can see that I have the centering ring now just above that mark. We have a bead of glue that has formed on the top edge of that centering ring. I'm going to want to wipe that off. So for the yellow glue, I'm going to be using my finger, just gently wiping around. And you might notice that you might kind of throw that centering ring a little bit off kilter, but that's okay. We're gonna verify that later on whenever we get the second centering ring on. So I'm going to apply another bead of glue. We're also going to be applying this just above that line, and same thing, you can also extend this line all the way around the circumference if you so choose. And we're going to just apply just enough to get going there. And then I'm going to slide this ring on from the top. And then I'm going to make sure I notate where that mark is on my tube. I'm going to slide the centering ring down onto that glue, stopping at that mark. So the fit of these centering rings is actually quite important. So we want to make sure that we can verify how they fit onto the tube, and then we'll be setting this aside to dry. I just did what we did on the other one of just kind of like wiping off some glue. To verify that fit, you can either do one of two things. You can use a ruler and you can double check that measurement all the way around, kind of rotating it as you go, making sure that the centering ring is as level as possible. Or you can take one of those fins that we set aside and we can actually use that to verify our fit. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting that fin tab just on top of the centering ring as it's actually going to be in the rocket, and then I'm going to push that top centering ring down onto the topmost section here of the fin tab. And once I do one point, I'm going to give it a little rotation, place it back there, push that top centering ring down again, give it another rotation, repeat this. And you know, sometimes you might notice a lot of movement in the centering rings. So it's important to just be gentle with it. Take your time. Like I said, this is a crucial step to make sure you get this right. So I think I'm going to double check my work here. Looks like we're a little wobbly, but that's okay. And the glue, over time, will kind of try to lock itself into place. So you might notice it binding up a little bit. So now I've got my centering rings nice and aligned. I'm going to set this aside to let that initially cure. And then I'm going to move to the next step where we're going to be starting to work on cutting the fin slots in the upper stage tube. And then we'll come back to this here in a little bit to apply some fillets. So now we're going to be moving on to cutting the upper stage fin slots. You'll notice that there's this sheet of paper that's in the middle of your instructions. We're going to want to take that out. You'll notice that it's blank on the back, so we're going to be cutting these guides out of here. I'm going to be wanting to cut out the one that says upper stage fin cutting guide. And we're going to be utilizing that to tell us exactly where we want to be cutting our slots. So you can use either a pair of scissors. I'm going to be using an X-Acto knife with a ruler, in which I'm just going to put my ruler up to the edge of my guide and then just score through that. And then I'm going to just work my way all the way around, cutting out my guide. So now that we've cut out our guide, we can set aside this for the time being. We'll come back to it later for future steps. And we can look in more detail at our fin slot cutting guide. We can see here, it also tells us where we need to be putting our launch lug on the rocket. And then these black, grayish black rectangles, that's what we're actually going to be cutting out when we cut our fin slots. So this is actually going to be taped around the body tube, which you see here. But before we tape this around the body tube, we want to make sure that we're able to get it properly aligned. So we need to draw a singular line down the length of this body tube. You can either use a door frame, like we say in the instructions, or if you have one of our ultimate tube cutting guides, you can use that as well. So I have my ultimate tube cutting guide, and I'm going to simply place my tube here, as you can see, and I'm going to run a nice, clean, straight line down the length of my tube. And now that I have that line marked, I can set aside my marking guide, and we can see here that we're going to be lining up the seam of our guide. So this seam here, we're going to be lining that up with the line that we just drew, and we're going to be lining up the bottom edge of this template with the bottom edge of the tube. So we'll be taking out some clear tape. So now that we have our tape and we've cut out our fin marking guide and we have our tube, we're going to actually work on wrapping this around our body tube here. So first thing I want to do, I want to carefully wrap that around the body tube like shown. Sorry for picking. And then I want to take one, even two pieces of tape might be beneficial. I'm going to put a piece of tape right here at the top, and then another piece of tape right here towards the bottom. I want to make sure that these lines are aligned whenever I'm taping this together, these two alignment guidelines. And then I want to make sure that the piece of paper fully goes up to the other line where it's meant to overlap. So we want to move our guide now to the bottom of the tube so that way it's flush. I'm going to take a third piece of tape. I'm going to place this right here at the top. So once I've placed that tape at the top, we know our alignment guide is held nicely in place. I want to take my pencil and I want to, along that launch lug line, I want to place a mark, and we'll come back to this later once we've cut our fin slots, and we'll mark the length of the tube where we're wanting our launch lug. Now, I want to take a good sharp hobby knife, which I have here, and I'm going to start working on cutting out our fin slots for those grayish black rectangles. Now, we're leaving the guide on as we're going to be cutting this, and I'm just going to be taking multiple light strokes as I do this, in which I'm going to be cutting the two long lengths first, and then I'm going to cut the short lengths afterwards once I've gone all the way through on the long lengths. So here we can see we're going to be doing light strokes, making sure we're following the line as close as we possibly can. I'm cutting through the guide, and that's okay. Making sure we stop at the end of there. I'm going to go back with another light stroke, making sure we're staying on the line that we just previously cut. So do your best to just take your time here and don't rush it, because that's whenever your cuts can get a little sloppy. We're going to do our best to keep it clean. So I've pierced through all the way on that side, and I'm going to just run the X-Acto knife up the length of that slot, making sure we are good. Now I'm going to do the other side, doing my best to follow that line as closely as possible. Be gentle with it because it can easily try to run away from you a little bit. Usually it takes like 3 to 4 passes to get all the way through the tube if you're taking light strokes. So there we go, all the way through the tube. I want to make sure that I'm cut all the way to the end, so I'm just placing the knife vertical and just pushing down as I'm gently pulling forwards. And then I'm going to make sure that I am all the way up on the front on this side. Make sure to keep your hands out of the way. And then from there, I'm going to use that same kind of pushing motion to just go right to the corner, pierce all the way through the tube, and then pierce all the way through the tube on the ends. And then I just push through the middle there, and then there we go. That's one fin slot done. I can go back and like clean up any little discrepancies. And now I'm going to repeat that step for the remaining 2 fin slots on this tube. And we'll start back up once we're done with that. So now that I've finished cutting my fin slots and I've made sure they're all nice and clean, I'm going to go back and I'm going to remove our slotting guide, and then I'm going to then mark my launch lug line up the entire length of the tube. So we'll simply pry back that tape that we were using to hold this guide on. Careful to try not to leave any tape residue behind, because we want to get a nice clean paint job on this later on. So good there. As you can see, we have our fin slots. They look nice. And I'm going to, in my case, I'm going to use the Ultimate Tube Marking Guide again. And you can also use a door frame or whatever you find easiest to mark your lines. And I'm going to gently, having to correct myself. I'm going to hold the tube so that way I can line up this mark and then get it so that way I can place a mark cleanly up the entire length of the tube. Go and verify your work. Make sure your mark looks actually like nice and straight down the length of the tube. And as we can see, ours is looking good. And now we're going to be done with this, and we're going to set this aside for just a couple minutes while we continue to work on the upper stage engine mount. Okay, so now that our centering rings have dried in place to where we want them, I'm going to go back and I'm going to apply some additional wood glue to get some additional bonding with some fillets. So here we're going to use our glue, which the bottle has become clogged, so that is unfortunate. Make a little mess, that's okay. I'm going to use my glue and I'm going to gently go around the entire circumference of both the top and the bottom of the centering ring. So you don't need to apply a whole lot because we're going to want to spread this out whenever we are done here. We're going to spread it out using our finger. So don't be afraid to get a little glue on your finger. That's okay. Got it on the top. I'm going to switch over to the bottom. Just gently rotating that around. Applying glue. And especially on this centering ring that I'm working here on right now, it's important that I don't want to clog up that the little hole that we see right here in the centering ring, because that we're going to need to thread our Kevlar through. So now that I've got the glue on there, I'm going to spread it out so that way we get a nice fillet. Spread it out on the top and the bottom of the centering ring. Get a nice even spread. And then once this is complete, we're going to set this part aside and let the glue dry for just a little bit. and then we'll come back to it. Okay. Make sure that you don't get any glue on the outsides of the centering rings just yet. We want to make sure that it goes into the body tube nicely. So now that that's complete, we're going to set this aside, let it cure for a couple minutes, and then we'll come right back to it. All right, so before we move forward with installing our aramid cord, I want to test the fit of our centering rings here in our body tube, because we want to make sure that whenever we actually try to glue this in, that it glues in properly. So I can see here that it's a little on the snug side. It's like just on the brink of wanting to go into the body tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and I'm going to gently sand the outside of our centering ring to remove just enough of that centering ring material so that way it'll slide nicely into the tube. You're going to want to do this to both centering rings. So right now I'm working on the forward centering ring, and then I'm going to work on the aft here in just a second. Okay, did the forward, working on the aft. And you can either do it like I'm doing here with just a piece of sandpaper holding it down onto a table, or you can use a sanding block, or whatever works best for you. At the end of the day, it just matters that we get the job done and the centering rings fit nicely. Okay, so I sanded those down just a little bit. I'm going to go back and check. Okay. We see that fits nicely, and then see if the aft one fits nicely, and that fits nicely as well. So now that we've checked the fit of our centering rings, we're going to remove that from the rocket, or from the body tube for that matter, and we're going to open up our bag that has our elastic, and then there's two different sizes of aramid cord in there. So I'm going to cut open the bag here, and I want the thicker aramid cord. That's our 300-pound aramid cord, and then the other one is our 100-pound. This one we'll set aside for later. We're going to use that for the booster, and then this one we'll also set aside later, and that's going to be also, but that one's for the upper stage. And these other components will be addressed later on. We'll also set those aside. So, taking our 300-pound aramid cord and our engine mount here for the upper stage, I'm going to thread the aramid cord through that loop, through that hole, up in the forward section. You'll notice that the cord might be like a little hard on the ends there. And you might actually have to trim it off so that a way you can actually get it to fit through the hole properly. Use a nice sharp pair of scissors. Aramid cord can be a little notorious for being difficult to cut, but it's not too bad if you have a sharp pair of scissors. And then we're going to take that aramid cord, we're going to thread it through the centering ring as so, and pull that through. Now, what we're going to do from there is we're going to wrap this around the diameter of the center of the engine mount. Make sure we give ourselves some slack to have enough of this cord to play with. And I'm just going to do a simple overhand knot. As so. So we can see that. I'm going to pull that tight. I don't want to have too much of a tail on it, this being the tail right here, because we want to just like not be having that fight us as we try to continue to assemble the rocket. So I'm going to tighten up that knot nicely, and then I'm going to pull on the cord. So this is actually also known as a slip knot, so it makes it really nice and easy to tie that knot, and then you can just pull it tight, and it's just cinching down around the engine mount tube nicely. Now, this isn't going to be accessible in the future, so I want to make sure that it's locked in for whenever we continue our assembly. So I'm going to take our glue bottle, and I'm going to put a drop of glue on the knot. I'm using yellow glue. You can use CA. You can also use epoxy, just whatever glue is available to you. You know, we've been using the yellow glue, so that's what we're going to continue using. Personal preference is okay as well. Okay, so now that we've glued that aramid cord into place, we're going to grab our body tube that we just cut slots in a minute ago, and we're going to work on gluing our engine mount assembly into place. So this is where it might be worthwhile to get yourself a wooden stick. That is what you're going to be using to help apply the glue into the body tube there before you actually insert your engine mount. So now that I have my dowel, I'm going to be applying the glue just above our slot here and just below the slot there. So in the instructions, I believe it says, yep, just like that. Like I said, we're applying it just above the slot and just below the slot. So I'm going to take my glue, just roll some glue onto the end of the stick. You're gonna notice that it starts wanting to like dribble and drop, and if it drops a little bit, that's okay. Just try not to get it on your rocket. And then just gently apply that into your body tube there. And we want to have this glue be applied to the entire circumference, the entire internal circumference of the rocket. Right now I'm working on applying the glue to the back side, and then here in a sec I will apply that glue to the front. And you want to get a good coating for each side. Okay, now that I'm done with the one on the bottom, I'm going to do the one on the top, and then we'll be right back and we'll be gluing in the engine mount. All right, so now that I've applied glue inside the body tube just above and below the fin slot like we mentioned, I'm going to take my engine mount, making sure that we have the shock cord end facing towards what's going to be the top of the rocket. And I'm going to gently thread that shock cord through the rocket, trying our best not to get a whole bunch of glue on it. And then we're going to slide in our engine mount from there. It's important to remember that I want to put this knot from our engine mount, I want to place it in between fin slots. That's going to be an important thing to make sure that it doesn't cause us troubles later on. So for me, it required just a little force to get that all the way in, and then I'm going to slide this in, and then it just needs to be flush with the bottom of the body tube. So I'm just going to use the table to push it nice and flush, and then there we can see we are done installing our engine mount, and you should be able to see that the centering rings clear the slots on both sides. So with that, we're going to set this aside to dry for a little bit, and we're going to move on to the next step. So for our next step, we're going to grab one of the 3 included couplers, and we're going to grab one of the 4 included body tubes, in addition to our body tube that we cut a slot in here just a second ago, and we put our engine mount in it. And we're going to first move forward with marking this coupler at halfway, so that way we can glue it into place and join these two body tubes together. So this is a 4-inch long coupler, so I'm going to mark it right here at 2 inches. Just want to make one good mark there, and that'll be good to go. And then we are going to take I'm going to start with the body tube that doesn't have the engine mount in it, and I'm going to apply a good bead of our yellow glue inside of the body tube here. So just applying a good bead. Being generous in this case is not bad. And then I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to spread that glue out a bit because we want to get as much of that glue to bond with the coupler surface as possible, ensuring that our rocket is good and strong. So now that I've spread that glue out, you can see my finger is nicely covered in glue, but also the inside of the body tube is also nicely covered in glue. I'm going to take that coupler, notate where my mark is, and then I'm going to insert the coupler so that way it lines up with that mark. You can see that I was rotating the coupler as I inserted it. That helps spread out the glue and make sure that it gets evenly coating the coupler. So I highly recommend doing that yourself. And then we're going to set that aside for just a moment, let that cure up, and then come back and join our section with the fin slots in it with the section that we just put the coupler into. All right, so now that this has had time to dry up a little bit, we're going to work on gluing together our section that we cut the slots and put the engine mount in, and that upper section. So I'm going to set that upper section aside for here just for a couple moments. I'm going to work on doing the same like I just did with the other tube. Make sure you're on the side opposite of the slots that we are going to be applying a bead of glue. It's okay if a little bit of the glue gets on the aramid cord. It's not the end of the world. Just try to limit it as much as you can. And then I'm going to use my finger again to spread that glue out so that way we get a nice bond with our tube. So we're spreading that glue out. That's good to go. So now we're going to take our upper tube. We're going to thread that aramid cord through there, making sure that things are going smoothly. We don't want to pinch the cord, so I'm just going to pull up on it gently. And then I'm going to gently put in the coupler. Same as before, I'm going to rotate it a little bit as I'm gluing it down. Personal preference, I like to align the spirals as much as I can. You might find it be a little easier whenever you're working on painting the rocket. So now that we have that glued together, we're going to let this dry for just a moment as we start to prepare the fins to be glued into this section of the rocket. All right, so now that our coupler of our two tubes is drying in place, we're going to move forward with working on sanding the leading edge and the trailing edge of our fins. And we're going to be putting a nice rounded over profile on both edges, as you can see in your instructions. So you can actually do this on all 6 of your fins if you so choose. If not, we'll repeat this step later on as we're working on the booster. So I'm going to get started on working on rounding over the leading edge and trailing edge, and we will get back to you when we're done. All right, so I've finished sanding the leading and trailing edges of all 6 of my fins. So I'm going to take the other half of those fins, I'm going to set them aside for later for whenever we work on the booster. And now I'm going to start working on gluing in my fins to the upper stage of our rocket. So checking my instructions, I'm going to see that I'm going to take one fin first, and we're going to apply a bead of yellow glue to the what we're going to call the root edge of the fin, like so, because this will not only glue it to the body tube of the rocket, but it's also going to glue it to the engine mount. And I also want to put a little bit of glue on those vertical bits as well. And if you make a little mess, that's okay. Just kind of wipe that up with your finger. I like to spread the glue out a little bit with my finger to make sure it's got a nice even coating before we go ahead and insert it into the rocket. So now that we've got that glue on the fin, we're going to go ahead and insert it into our slot here. You might have to wiggle it just a little bit to get it to go in. And then you just glue it right on down. And then you're going to want to, I like to look at it from like down the length of the tube to make sure that the fin is vertical. And you can also use the fin alignment guide that's included on the same sheet that you cut out the fin slot cutting guide. So you can use that as well to make sure that your fin's good and vertical. So that looks good. Now I'm going to repeat this same step for the rest of the fins, and I'm going to let that dry before I put on some fin fillets. All right, now that our fins have had some time to dry in place, we're going to start working on doing the fillets on the fins. So what I mean by fillets is we're going to apply a bead of glue here at the base of each side of the fin. And we're going to repeat that on all three sides of the rocket. So I'm going to apply this bead of glue and just do a small bead. Doesn't have to be huge. Down the tube. And then I'm going to run my finger across that glue to make sure that we spread our glue out nicely. Now you might have excess glue like you see on my finger here, so I'm going to take a tissue and just simply wipe that off. And you might find that there might be a little bit of excess glue on your body tube as well. I like to use a tissue to just like gently wipe off all that excess. It's important to wipe it off right away as soon as you get the glue on there, because if you don't, it's going to be much harder in the future to get off the excess glue that might not look as nice. So I'm just going in, cleaning up my fillets. Now that I've done one fillet, I'm going to let this dry for just a little bit, and I'm going to go finish up the remaining two sides. And we will get right back to you once we're done with that. All right, so now that our fillets have had some time to dry and we've done all three of them, we're going to move forward and start working on the phase of attaching our launch lugs. Now in the instructions, you do have the option to either attach launch lugs or rail buttons, and in this case, we're going to go forward with the launch lugs. If you were doing rail buttons, you do need a 1/8 inch drill bit to drill holes in the same locations that we're going to be marking the launch lugs on our rocket. So, referencing the instructions, we can see we need to place a mark on the fins at 2 inches up from the base and 8 inches up from the base. So I'm going to hold my ruler there gently. I'm going to place a mark at 2 inches. And then move on down and place another mark at 8. Okay, move my ruler out of the way. Now, I'm going to take my launch lugs here. If you so choose, you can sand up the attachment point that we're going to be gluing it to the rocket with. And then we will apply a small bead of glue. And we are going to attach our launch lug nicely on the line and we are going to make the base of the launch lug even with that mark that we just placed. So we're going to take our time, be careful here, get that launch lug nicely aligned, making sure that we're all good and even. Another option you have is you can actually also place another vertical line on a different fin segment of your rocket, and you can put both the launch lugs and the rail buttons. So that way you have options whenever you're flying. And that's personally what I like to do whenever I'm flying, to give myself those options. And apply another small bead of glue, and then apply our second launch lug here, right at that mark. Oh, little mistake there, that's okay. Move my hand out of the way and get this launch lug in place. Wipe off that extra glue. We want to get it aligned with that mark, and then check that it is parallel with lined up with that line that we drew. So a last final check that you can do is once you get your launch lugs in place, you can look down the length of your rocket, and we want to see that the launch lugs look good and straight. I'm making a little adjustment here, and then that they are both along the line properly, making another little adjustment there. So once you're complete with that, we're going to set this aside again, let that dry again, and we're going to move forward with building our payload section of the rocket now. All right, so we're going to start working on the payload bay section of the Vogel. And to start, we're going to open up this package here that has a couple of the parts for the booster, but it also actually has a part for the payload bay. So we're going to open that right on up and get that one part out that we need. We're going to set aside these other parts for later, whenever we get to the booster. So this is that part that I'm talking about for the payload bay. Here we have a little hole in the center of it for the screw eye that we'll be also screwing in later on in this step. And then we're going to be right now focusing on gluing this piece into our payload, or the payload bay coupler. So with that bulkhead that we have there, we want to test fit it into our coupler to make sure that it's a good fit, and if it's not fitting quite right, we'll sand it a little bit to get it to fit like we want. So as we can see, it's a little snug right now, and I don't want to force it too much. So I'm going to take my time, just like we did with the centering rings, and I'm just going to sand this bulkhead on our sandpaper here until we get the fit that we're desiring. So give it a good couple rotations around there, and then once we feel satisfied, we're going to give it another check, and we'll find that fits quite nice. So I'm going to push that part back out of our coupler, and I'm going to take my yellow glue. I'm going to apply a bead of yellow glue just at the edge there. Being generous with your glue in this case is okay. So applying a bead all the way around the inner circumference. And then I'm going to spread that glue just a little bit. We don't have to spread it like we did with the coupler, where I was like spreading it like widely across the entire circumference. You can see I'm just kind of like just giving it a little tap to spread it out just a little bit. And then I'm going to wipe off the excess glue off of my finger into the coupler. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bulkhead, insert it into the coupler, and then to get it flush like we want, I'm going to push it down on the table. And you'll see on the inside, it pushes up a bead of glue on the inside. If you so choose, you can use like a little stick to like spread out that glue a little more. wouldn't be a bad idea from my perspective, and that just helps make sure that that bulkhead is glued in there nicely. Awesome. So once you're done with that, if you're gentle, you can keep moving forward with the construction of getting this now glued into our third section of body tube. If not, you can set this aside and let this dry. But I'm going to move ahead and start placing a mark along the 2-inch mark. Since this is a 4-inch long coupler, I'm going to mark at 2 inches. And now, we'll set that right there for now. And I'm going to take my third section of tube, and it doesn't matter which end you choose, but we just need to apply a good generous bead of glue into one of the ends, just like we did whenever we were coupling together the other sections. So I'm going to apply a nice generous bead of glue, make sure y'all can see that. Good generous bead. And then I'm going to do exactly like I did last time, and I'm going to spread that out with my finger, making sure we're spreading it out evenly and nicely. Okay, and then I'll just wipe off that excess glue on the edge like so. And then we'll pick up our coupler, locate that 2-inch mark that we made, and on the same side that we put in glue, we're going to insert that into the rocket and gently insert it and twist. That twisting is going to help spread that glue. Okay, so once we're done with that, we will set this aside to let it dry for just a moment, and then we'll come back and we'll install the screw eye and then install our nose cone into the top of the payload bay. So now that that's had some time to dry, we're going to work on screwing in the metal screw eye into the bottom of our bulkhead in that hole that we showed you earlier. But before I do so, I'm going to apply a drop of glue onto that hole. And what this is going to do whenever we screw in our screw eye, that's actually going to help ensure that the screw eye stays locked in. And it helps just a little bit. It's not like a guarantee, but every little bit helps. And you're just going to hand thread this in like so until the screw eye, I like to get it till the threads are bottomed out. So like such. Threads are bottomed out, and then if you want, you can even apply just a little bit of extra glue around the base there. For this step, you can use wood glue, you can use epoxy. I wouldn't recommend super glue because that might kick and like cure on you while you're trying to do so. And now that can dry up while we're doing the next steps. But before we're done there, we're going to test fit our nose cone into the body tube of our payload. And we can see that it's a good fit, but it's a little loose for what I might want since the nose cone's not getting like actually kicked off. So I'm going to take some masking tape and I'm going to apply some masking tape to our nose cone to get that fit just a little bit tighter. And you know, you're going to have to just like try it out and feel it out per se to see if the fit is how you want it to be. So I'm going to start off with just one wrap of masking tape first, like we can see right there. I just did one wrap all the way around, and then now I'm going to test fit that into my body tube again. And that's a nice fit. I like that. So we're done with the payload section now, and our bottom section of the upper stage should be also pretty much done and ready to go. Next thing we're going to be doing is attaching our motor retainer. So the first step of attaching our engine retainer is we're going to take our section that we actually glue onto the rocket which is this section that I'm holding here and showing you with the sandpaper in my hand. And we want to sand this inner edge. That's going to make sure that whenever we use epoxy to glue this on, we get a nice good bond with it. So I'm going to take this sandpaper and just give it a good scoring around the entire inner circumference of our screw retainer. And that looks good. And then now that I'm done with that, we're going to mix up some epoxy. Now, this is 5-minute epoxy that you can find on estisrockets.com, and it's a 2-part, so you just have to do equal parts of each section, each type of epoxy, or each section of the epoxy, whatever you want to call it. And in this case, we're going to, right now I'm putting out a small amount of the hardener section. And then I'm going to put that cap back on, set that aside. And now we're going to do a equal amount of the epoxy resin. Now, do be careful. Make sure not to get the epoxy on your fingers, because that it can cause irritation. So gloves can be beneficial in this case if you do feel like you might get epoxy on your fingers. And then we're going to take those equal parts and we're going to mix those together on our plate here with a little stir stick and give it a good mixing for about like minute or two. And then we will apply it to our engine retainer. So now that that epoxy has been thoroughly mixed, I'm going to take a small amount of it, put it on the end of my stick, and then I will carefully apply it on the inside of our engine retainer here. Making sure to be as gentle as possible. If you're doing it like I'm doing it, where you apply it to the inside of the engine retainer, you're gonna need to go and take a tissue and you're gonna have to wipe some excess epoxy off that kind of gets pushed out in the process of gluing it in. Or you can apply it to the outside of your engine mount tube here, and that excess that gets pushed out will not be as much of a trouble. So I'm going to gently apply on my engine retainer here until it's bottomed out. I'm giving it a rotation just like we were doing with the couplers to help make sure that it's fully locked in. Now we have a little bead of epoxy that is formed on the inside. We need to wipe that out to make sure that we don't run into issues whenever we're putting in our engine. So I'm going to take a tissue and gently wipe out that excess epoxy. Okay, so now you're good to go to let that fully cure, and then once it's fully cured, you can screw on the other half of your engine retainer. And the next step that we're going to be doing is working on attaching the recovery harness. All right, so the first part of finishing out our recovery system is we're going to tie a simple slip knot into our Kevlar here, or aramid cord. So that's going to simply go like this, where I loop that behind, loop that over, loop it through, and then back down. And then I will cinch up that knot, like so. And as we can see, this knot is now able to slide. And then we're going to repeat that using our 6mm elastic, tying it through the loop, and then slipping that under, and then back over. Here, let me make this just a little bit bigger so that way it's easier to see. So we slipped it under, we're going back over, and then through that loop that we made. So we're just tying an overhand knot back on top of this. And then we're going to cinch that tight, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull those slip knots down onto each other. And this secures our two sections of the shock cord together quite nicely. And then to ensure that these don't come apart during flight, I like to add just a drop of glue to our knot, and you can put a little bit of glue on the on our Kevlar, and then a little bit of glue on the elastic. If your glue is not giving you a little bit of troubles, but that's okay. So we'll just put a little bit on there, like so, and then we'll let that dry. Sometimes you can spread it around, make sure that it's like not making too much of a mess. Let me get that glue off of my work surface. And then what we're going to do next is we actually need to tie another knot that we're going to be attaching our parachute to onto the opposite end of our elastic. So you can see we have the elastic where we attached it here to the air mid cord, and here's my opposite end. So we're going to go 6 inches down from the very tip of that. I'm going to use my table mat here to measure that 6 inches. We can see right there, that's 6 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to form what we call a bite in the cord. So this is a bite. And then I'm going to take that bite and do a simple overhand knot. So I'm feeding that back, making a loop with those two segments, and then I'm going to feed this under and then up through the elastic to form that loop in our cord. So that's what you would call a overhand on a bite. And then there, we can do the same thing if you want. You can attach a little, or apply a little dot of glue. But in this case, if you tighten that up, elastic's pretty good about like holding a knot on itself. So I'm going to say that's good, and that's going to be our attachment point for our parachute. And then now I am going to take our payload section, which we just brought up, and I am going to tie with that off with this free end of that we just tied our little overhand on a bite on. I'm going to feed that up through our eye nut there, or our eye screw, and I'm just going to tie another slip knot, just like we did with attaching the two sections of cord together. So tie slip knot, pull that knot tight, and then we want to, just like we did with the other ones, cinch that slip knot down onto the eye nut. So that completes attaching your shock cord or recovery harness to your rocket. And next thing that we're going to be doing here shortly is we're going to be attaching our parachute. And we'll get right back to you on that here shortly. All right, to finish the construction of our upper stage of the Vogel kit, we're going to take our 18-inch nylon parachute here, and we want to open it up and make sure that we do our best to grab all the shroud lines So that way I'm holding all the loops of the shroud lines, as you see here. And I like to grab the tip of the parachute with my finger while I'm holding the base of the shroud lines with my fingers like that. So that way I know I'm grabbing the very bottom of the shroud lines. So with that, I'm going to take the shroud lines here, like so, and we're going to revisit that knot that we tied in our elastic, and we're going to feed the shroud line through the shroud lines through that knot, like so. Making sure that whenever I grab back here, I am grabbing properly in the loop. And then what we're going to do, we can see we have a nice big hole here that has formed like as it was passing through those the loop in our elastic. I'm going to pass the parachute through that loop, and then whenever I do that, I'm going to be pulling on the tip of the parachute as I'm pulling on the base of my elastic here, and in doing so, it pulls the shroud lines nice and tight. And our parachute is now attached, and this is the completed construction of the upper stage of the Vogel. Next, we're going to be working on the booster. To start construction of the booster, we're going to start working on the booster's engine mount first. And we're going to do so by taking our second engine mount that we had in our box, and we're going to unpackage the two centering rings that have baffle holes in them. These centering rings are identical, so no need to worry about putting either one in the incorrect place. Same thing as before, we're going to want to test fit our centering rings, make sure that they fit over the tube properly. That's good. And then now we are going to reference our instructions and mark where we want to be actually gluing our centering rings into place. So in this case, we're going to put a mark at 3/4 of an inch and 4.5 inches. So I'm going to use my ruler here, place it so that it's flush at the base. Be careful. Be careful to make sure that we're getting it right. I'm going to put a mark at 0.75 inches, 3/4 of an inch, and then 4.5 inches, 4.5 inches. And if you are in need of the metric conversions, those are listed in the instructions. And now that we've marked that, we can go forward and taking our glue bottle, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did before, where I'm going to apply a bead of glue around the circumference just above that mark. And like I said last time, you can extend that line around the entire circumference of the tube, and it is beneficial because it helps you get the centering rings aligned easier. So that's something that I think is worthwhile doing if you are willing to take the time. So we're going to roughly get that one into place, and then we're going to also then apply a bead of glue here and placing that bead of glue just above the mark all the way around the circumference. And then putting our other centering ring into place. So at this point, we're going to repeat the same steps that we repeated during the upper stage engine mount assembly, where I'm going to utilize one of our fins, and we can utilize our ruler to make sure that our centering rings are aligned properly, and then from there we will let it dry, and we'll also apply those fillets around the top and bottom of our centering rings where they contact the engine mount tube. So from there, we'll move on to working on cutting the fin slots in our fourth and final tube. So the second step that we're going to be doing in building our booster is we're going to be marking and cutting our fin slots and then the launch lug line. We're going to cut out the guide that's on the same sheet of paper that we cut out the other guide, and we're going to be following a very similar procedure of wrapping it around the body tube, as so, and then from there, we're going to use multiple pieces of tape, just like we did last time, to secure it to our body tube while we're cutting our slots. So pay close attention to the fact that we want to make sure that these lines are lined up, just like so. And then we're going to do another piece of tape, get this bottom one. I want to pull the paper in to make sure that it's like cinched together nicely around the body tube. Going to put that second piece of paper, or tape, my bad. And then what we're going to do from there is get that guide to be flush with the bottom of our tube, just like last time. And then from there, I'm going to take a third piece of tape and then secure our guide into place. I'm putting a little bit of the tape onto our guide and then a little bit of tape just onto the body tube there. Before I cut my slots, I'm going to go in, just like last time, mark our launch lug line. We'll go back and extend that up the entire length. And then from there, I'm going to repeat the same steps of cutting out the fin slots. Once we're complete with this, we will move on to sanding the fins just like we did last time, and then from there moving on to actually attaching them to the rocket. So with that, the next time you see me, you will see this tube with slots in it. So with your fin slots cut and your launch lug line now marked, we're going to move on to taking our engine mount and test fitting it into our tube as so. And just like last time, if the fit is too snug, we're going to sand it to make sure that it fits as needed. So as we can see, that's just a hair snug. So I'm going to take my sandpaper and then give that just a light sanding to ensure a good, proper fit. And then afterwards, we'll go in and we'll apply a nice bead of glue just above the slot and just below the slot and spread it out just like we did on the upper stage, and then we'll insert our engine mount tube for the booster. So the next time you see these two components, they will be glued together. So now that we have the engine mount glued in and we have all of our fin slots and all that is all looking good, we're going to move forward with gluing in our fins just like we did on the upper stage. So the next time you see this rocket, the fins will be glued in and the fillets will be complete. So with the fins now fully attached, we'll move forward with attaching the engine retainer just like we did on the upper stage onto the booster stage. So whenever we do so, just like last time, we'll take our sandpaper, scuff up the inside diameter of our part of the engine retainer that actually gets mounted to the rocket. Once completed, wipe off that excess dust, and we'll go forth with doing our two-part 50-50 epoxy and finish attaching it to the rocket. So once you see the rocket next, the engine retainer will be fully attached and we'll be moving on to the booster recovery section. To start off working on the booster recovery system, we're going to take our two baffled centering rings and then these two other smaller centering rings, and we're going to test fit all of them into their respective componentry to make sure that every component fits as anticipated. And all of these should have a fairly loose fit to them. It's important to note that whenever you're dealing with these two larger baffled centering rings, one of them is intended to fit on the inner diameter of the blue tube, of this blue coupler, and one of them is intended to fit on the outer diameter, or match the outer diameter. So this one matches our outer diameter, and that one has 6 holes in it, and then our one that has 5 holes in it is intended to go on the inner diameter. So if you encounter what I'm encountering, where it's a little bit snug, you can go ahead and sand the outside of this centering ring until it fits as desired. And we'll just go ahead and give this a good little bit of sanding here until we are happy with the fit. So a little bit of sanding, coming back and checking. Still a little snug. It might be worth checking on the other side of the tube as well, because sometimes it varies if there's a little burr on the tube. So I'm going to give this a little more sanding, and whenever you see me next, we're going to go start marking our little baffle tube and start getting these centering rings mounted. So now that we've tested the fit of all of our centering ring componentry, we're going to move forward with marking the distances that we need on our baffle tube here. So referencing our instructions, we can see that we need to put a mark at 1/2 inch, 1.75 inches, and then 5.75 inches. So I'm going to start off by putting a mark at 1/2 inch, and then our second mark at 1 3/4 inches, 1.75, and then our third and final mark at 5.75, or 5 3/4. So from there, we're going to move forward with starting the mounting of our smaller centering ring components here. These will end up interfacing such that they go into the 29 millimeter engine mount tube. So to start, I am going to take my yellow glue, and just like we've been doing, I am going to make a bead of glue. I'm going to make it just above right here, around the circumference of the tube, all the way around. And then we'll take our centering ring, and then I'm giving it a little rotation to help spread that glue, and then we'll lock it in place right there just above the mark. It's important to note that for this one, it's not as crucial for you to get the ring like perfectly parallel, but it is beneficial if you can. It might help things go a little bit smoother whenever you're finishing the final assembly. So we're going to take this second centering ring, and we're going to place a bead of glue just around the very end of the tube, right next to the ring that we just glued on, all the way around the circumference, like we've been doing. And once you've completed that, you'll slide on this second centering ring, and then we will simply make it go flush with the end. Once that's completed, we can go back and double check the alignment of our other ring, try to get it nice and parallel, and then we can let that sit and cure for a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll start working on the larger baffled centering rings. So now we're going to move forward on our booster recovery system with attaching or gluing on the centering ring that has 6 baffle holes in it. It's crucial to make sure we're using the one with 6 baffle holes, because the system's not going to work properly if you try to flip it around. So to start, we are going to take our glue bottle again, and we're going to apply a bead of glue just above that 1.75 inch mark, all the way around the circumference, just like we've been doing with all the other rings. That nicely around the circumference. And then from the top, we are going to slide on this ring and make sure that it is sitting properly. Now for this, it doesn't matter how you have the ring rotated at the moment, but this one, it's important to take your time to make sure that the ring is nice and like properly perpendicular, parallel, however you want to call it, like nicely centered around the body tube there. And I'll show you a little tip here in a little bit on how we're going to further verify that utilizing some of our other parts while this is actually still wet and curing, or drying in this case, so that way we're not having issues along the way. Prior to gluing on the centering ring with 5 pieces, we're going to take our little thick wall yellow coupler here, and we're going to apply a good generous bead of glue into the end of this body tube. And we're going to spread it out. I'm going to use my pinky for this one because I can't as easily fit in my pointer finger. Make sure you have a tissue or a paper towel or something on hand to wipe off that spare glue off your finger. It's always a good thing. And then from there, with that glue inside the tube, we're going to just fully insert this coupler into our baffle tube. Now the purpose of this thick-walled tube is that this actually helps ensure that the tube is less likely to get damaged whenever you're actually performing staging. So that's why that's there. Okay, we're going to go back, double check our placement of that 6-hole centering ring, and now we're going to go back and apply our bead of glue around our 5.75 inch mark just above it, all the way around the circumference. And then we're going to glue on our, ooh, my bad, I slid that way too far down, but that's okay. We're going to want to, if you get any like excess glue like that, you'll want to do your best to get that taken off. The important thing to note in this step is we want to make sure that you'll see that there's 2 notches here in both of the centering rings. We want to make sure that those are radially aligned, or like some might even say they're like clocked properly. So this is where I can like look down the length of the tube and make sure that it's clocked properly, make sure that we are aligned on our little marks that we had made on the tube. And now, before letting this dry, we're going to continue to proceed forward with grabbing our little rib sections of our recovery system, and we're going to glue these in place. But I almost went a step ahead of myself, and we want to make sure we attach our Kevlar first. This is 100-pound Kevlar, much lighter, but it is ample for our booster recovery. So just below our centering ring here, I'm going to want to, like we've done in the past, I'm going to loop it around. I'm going to tie a slip knot again. So simply doing an overhand knot. As you can see here, we just did an overhand knot where this leg of the string passes through the opening of the overhand knot, and I'm going to cinch that down. And then we'll simply cinch that down onto the tube, and we'll get this fully cinched and glued into place here in a bit once we get the ribs in place. We're going to want that knot to be located in between these 2 sections of the ribs. So as you can see here, we would have a rib here and a rib right here. I have that knot placed in between them. Okay? So I'm kind of like fighting against the clock here, but thankfully wood glue doesn't dry super fast. And I'm going to now push this string all the way up so that it's flush against that upper rib. And then I'm going to go and test fit my rib sections into their respective slot. It's important to note that one of these rib sections has like a little 45-degree angle notched out into it. That's the section that's supposed to be butting up against your aramid cord. So that way it gives it clearance as needed. So there we go. I think we need to push up that bottom section just a little bit, so that way we are seating properly. And this is what I'm saying, where in this case it does help to just like do all this assembly while the glue is still drying, so that way you don't accidentally mess up and get a rib section like not placed correctly or whatever it may be. It just gives you some peace of mind that you're not going to mess up your build. And I'm going to double check here that that's seated properly. And then once I put my two rib sections in there, I am simply holding the top of the tube, and then I'm pushing up with that bottom centering ring to make sure that we have good alignment on the ribs. And then I'm going to go in and double check that stuff's centered up properly. Always make sure to look at the notches or the markings on your tube. Get everything nicely aligned. And it looks like we are good to go on the centering rings. So our centering rings are roughly in place. And with that said now, I'm going to take them out and I'm going to reinstall them, but I'm going to apply a good bead of glue along the entire root of this rib. And then we'll place it back in place, permanently putting it in place. Clean up any excess glue off the tops, bottoms. Excess glue there, like inside, is more than okay. We actually kind of want that for this rocket. Ooh, I'm trying to run away from me there. We're going to place another bead of glue on the second rib, ensuring that we get full coverage. I like to spread it out a little bit, like I said. And we'll be good to go. To glue in that second rib, remember to make sure that 45-degree angle notch is placed so that it is on the same side as the Kevlar. Okay, we cleaned up the extra glue on the tops. I'm going to clean up this extra glue on the back. I'm just spreading it out like a fillet. Same thing on the back of this one. Now here's the crucial step. This compartment right here, that is where the parachute for your booster will be housed. So we want to make sure that this compartment is fully sealed off of any gases that might get into it, because we don't want our parachute getting damaged during a flight. So we can already see there's a little bit of glue that seeped out, but I want to apply a bead of glue around every contact surface that the centering rings and ribs are making with this tube. So that way it's fully sealed off. And we can be confident that our rocket is going to fly safely and recover properly. So I'm just spreading that glue around with my finger, making sure we get good full coverage. And this is where getting a little bit of glue on that knot of your aramid cord, that is more than okay. That'll lock it in, and we actually kind of want that. So I'm going to use the tip of the bottle there to spread it around a little bit. Okay, now I'm just going to, once I've done all that, I'm going to quickly give my part a once-over, making sure that everything looks proper. Clean up a little bit of extra glue there. Okay, that looks great. So now, once I've gotten to this point, I'm going to set this component aside and I need to let this dry before I move on to incorporating our coupler system into our recovery system. All right, so the next time you see this, this will be dry and we'll move on to attaching that coupler. All right, so once this has had some time to dry, we're going to go ahead and move forward with attaching this coupler section onto the recovery system. So prior to doing that, I liked to bundle up my aramid cord, and I just loosely bundled and like tied a knot in it, and then I just place it right there in the recovery bay where our parachute and aramid cord would be sitting. And I'm going to go ahead and take a ruler, but don't drop it. I'm going to go ahead and take a ruler and measure 2.5 inches down from this leading edge here. And I'm going to place a mark on the rib. So this is going to be our mark that we use to determine how deep we need to be going into the coupler. Okay, 2.5 inches. Okay, I have my mark roughly placed. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure to define that mark a little bit better so that it's a little more legible, noticeable, visible. And once I have that mark, I'll go ahead and I'll check the fit of our system into the coupler as so. And then it should slide in, and then we'll stop it at that 2.5 inch mark. So once we've done that and we've confirmed that it'll fit, we're going to go ahead and take that off. And then from there, we are going to take a glue stick and put a mark 2.5 inches down, and we're going to apply glue onto the inside of our tube here. So let me make this a little more legible. I'm going to mark at 2.5 inches, like so. And I'm going to take my yellow glue and start to just going to apply some glue down here. Just putting a good little bead of glue. Make sure to roll your stick around so that way you don't drip the glue at, if possible. Insert it 2.5 inches to that mark and then simply smear it around. You're probably going to have to do multiple applications to make sure you get plenty of glue on there, and that's okay. Okay, same thing, rolling this around so that way we don't drip glue, inserting it up to the mark, and smearing it around. I'm going to be generous, and I'm going to put one more third round application, and that should be then plenty of glue for our purpose. Don't drip glue on your rulers. Not ideal. Clean that off. And now that we've dripped our glue everywhere, get just a little more on there, rolling that around, and then applying it. Awesome. So now that we've done that, and we know that this face that's facing up is the side that we measured 2.5 inches down, and we have our 2.5 inch mark on our recovery system, I'm going to go ahead and insert this so that this system is being inserted up to that 2.5 inch mark. like we want it. So I'm feeling a little resistance. Just be gentle if you feel resistance. And just ease it in till we're flush. Wiggle it with that 2.5 inch mark. So once we're to that step, I'm going to want to double check that our coupler is not like off kilter or like slanted to the side, because that can happen with how it is with just one centering ring. So double check that, and then we're going to go ahead and wipe off any excess glue, and we're going to turn that excess glue that's like up there in the top and turn it into a fillet. So I'm making that into a fillet right now. And you'll notice in the instructions that we say try not to get glue onto the centering ring for the section like just above the where your parachute is housed. That's a little bit difficult, but I'll show you how we're going to handle that here a little later on as we actually assemble this into the rocket. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this aside to let it dry for just a moment, and then we're going to work on cutting out the hatch in the actual rocket body, and then we'll end up gluing this into the rocket itself. So once you see this part again, it will be fully dried, and we're going to move on to cutting out the hatch right now. Now we're going to start working on cutting out the hatch in our booster. So it's important to cut out the hatch marking guide, or the hatch cutting guide, but when doing so, do not cut out this section preemptively that says cut out. You'll see here in a second what I mean by that. So moving forward, we're going to take our booster, and we can see we have our launch lug guide, and I am going to, just like the guide says, I'm going to align this line with my launch lug line. I'm going to wrap it around. And making sure that we have our alignment lines lining up properly. I'm going to hold that in place. Grab myself a piece of tape. Double checking our alignment there, getting it pushed nice and tight around the body tube. Pushing that nice and tight together, making sure the lines are aligned, getting another piece of tape on there. And then now once we do that, as this states here, we want to align the top of the guide with the top of the body tube. So I'm going to push this up, making sure that all our lines are properly aligned as needed. And then in this case, I'm going to take 2 extra pieces of tape to hold this guide in place. I'm going to put one on this side of the tube, and then I'm going to flip it 180 degrees, put one on the other side of the tube. And I'm just pressing lightly. I'm not like pressing this tape down super hard, but now this guide is firmly in place. So what we're going to do from there is, now we can see this section that states cut out. I'm going to lightly score, just like we did with the fin slots. I'm going to lightly score along that line, along this line, and along the line on the bottom until I get this section of the tube cut out. So the next time you see this body tube, we will have this hatch cut out of the tube. All right, so now with your hatch cut out, as we can see here, it's important to take that section that you cut out, set it aside. I like to notate the orientation that I cut it out. That's why I put the arrow to indicate that that's up. I'm going to set that aside. And then you can remove of the templates that you just used. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to take my recovery bay assembly and I'm going to simply test fit it into the rocket. So these components here, those components will actually be inserting into the 29mm body tube. So that's really truly what we are checking to see if it's like fitting properly. And in this case, it's not quite fitting properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sandpaper and I'll just bring it up to an edge of a table, and I'm just going to sand these components until I can get a proper fit. And you'll go back and check that fit, and then once complete, we will move forward with gluing the assembly into place. Okay. So once you've completed test fitting the booster recovery assembly, we're going to move forward with gluing it into place. Now, there's a lot of areas that we need to apply glue for this assembly, and we need to make sure that stuff will go together smoothly and swiftly, so that way we don't accidentally have things lock up on us. So we're going to have a large surface right here that we're going to be applying a lot of glue to, and then from there we will be applying glue to the top edge of this piece here and this piece here. We're going to be putting glue around here, and then glue around these centering rings as well. So once all that glue is applied, then we're going to insert this whole assembly into the rocket. Prior to doing that glue up, I almost forgot, so don't do as I do, just do as I say. We want to make a mark that is 3/4 of an inch up, or no, not 3/4, 3 1/4 inch up, up from the base of the coupler. So here we can see I'm going from the base up 3 1/4 inches, and I'm making a mark. That indication line is so that whenever I insert this assembly into there, that tells me where I want this assembly to stop in the coupler itself. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to move forward with applying the large amounts of glue for this step to our booster. So I'm going to start by applying a lot of glue here. I'm just going to apply a good bead all throughout, and then I'm going to spread it around. So I'm taking that glue, spreading it around. It's important to make sure you get the glue spread well towards the edges here, because sometimes those edges will want to like delaminate a little bit if they're not glued down properly. So get that glue spread all nicely, covering every single little bit. As you can see, I'm not going down all the way because I know that the coupler is only going down probably like 75% of the hatch length, I would say. But if you get a little extra, that's not going to hurt anything. So that glue's applied. I'm going to grab my recovery system here. I'm going to apply a bead of glue right there, right here, and this is where being a little generous might be good. Right there and right there, all the way around the circumference of this. Clean up excess if you have it. So don't be too generous, but be generous. This is a fairly complex system for this recovery system, and it's important that we get all of these glue joints applied properly and applied well for it to work as intended. Okay, so we have our glue applied, making sure it's spread out evenly like we want it. We have our glue applied, and now I'm going to take this whole assembly and carefully insert it into our booster's body. So it might require a little bit of finessing, but it'll make its way in. Just give it a little bit of motion, movement, and help it work its way into the rocket. And if you insert it a little too far, that's okay. It should be able to back out. Find that mark that you made. We had that mark right here. And then ease it on down in all the way. Oop, don't do it too far. Ease it in down all the way till it's flush with that mark. Now, once you get it flush with that mark, you also need to make sure that it is rotationally proper. What you want to see is that these faces right here of those ribs should be approximately even with both sides of the hatch. And once you see that, and you see that that line is aligned, you will know that you did it properly. And what we're going to do to help this dry in place now is we're going to apply a little bit of tape down onto these side pieces to help hold them in place, because they're trying to kind of like peel back, and we want to hold those in place. So I'm going to take a little bit of masking tape here. I'm just going to put a piece of tape from here, holding that down. Wrap it over, hold that down. And you might want to put a piece of tape going around it as well. We're going to do the same thing over here on the other side. Piece of tape, pressing down, pressing that down, wrapping it over the top. Okay, so now before we move on to the next step, we're going to want to let this dry, and then we'll move on to cutting out this the coupler section of the hatch, and then we'll finish gluing together the hatch, attaching our parachutes as intended, and then finishing up building the booster. So the next time you see this will be dry, and we'll be working on cutting out that hatch. All right, so now that that is dried and our recovery system is glued into the actual booster, we are going to work on cutting this out like we were talking about. So to do so, I want to make sure that I extend the lines. I want to make sure I extend the lines from here all the way up the height of that coupler. So I'm going to use a ruler here. It might be a little hard to show, but I'm going to use a ruler here, just kind of butt it up against that line, and I'm going to just make that line continue up. And then I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, using my ruler to, yeah, this one might be a little hard to show, but that's okay. Using my ruler to extend that line all the way up. So you might be able to see it, that we have a line now extending all the way up there, a line now extending all the way up there. So the next step in this is that we're going to take our sharp X-Acto knife, or sharp hobby knife, and we are going to carefully score up the entire length of this, and then up that entire line that we just marked. And the same thing on the other side. So you should be really careful when doing this, because this blue coupler tube is a pretty tough tube, and it takes a good bit to cut it. So just take your time, take light cuts, and be careful to note that you're going to end up like cutting across a bulkhead. So you might find a point where you're cutting and then you hit the bulkhead and you have to like cut across past it. So with that said, the next time you see this part, this hatch is going to be cut off, and we'll start working on attaching the coupler section of the hatch to the body tube section of the hatch. All right, so now that we have both of our hatch sections cut off, the one from the coupler and the one from the body tube, we need to make a mark at 1 1/8 inches down from the top section of, down from the bottom of the body tube section. Sorry, not the top section. So I'm going to go in here. We know that this is the top. I'm going to measure from the bottom, measure 1 1/8 inches, and make a good noticeable mark. So 1 1/8, that's 1 inch plus 2 tick marks on most standard rulers. And then from there, I'm going to make sure that my coupler section is pointed in the up direction. So both of these have an arrow that they're pointed up or to that side of myself. And then I'm going to place below that 1 1/8 inch mark, apply a lot of glue all across this surface as so. I want to be generous with it because this is what's going to be holding that coupler section to the body, and there's going to be a little bit of force that this is going to be seeing. So we're going to spread that nice and evenly across that entire section, and then we're going to align that with the 1 1/8 inch mark, and then we're going to press down. I want to get a good press down to make sure that we're getting ample surface bonding between the two pieces. If there's any excess that's squeezing out, like you see, we want to just wipe that off. And we want to make sure that we can get these two edges of the coupler as flush as we can. They should be pretty flush depending with how we cut them. So with that said, we are going to move on to taking the little recovery tab that we're going to be attaching to our hatch here, and we're going to be gluing these two sections together. So we can take our hobby knife and just pop these out of their out of the little surrounding bit, like so. Just being careful to take our time, and we'll just pop that right on out. And then we're going to do the same thing on this other one. Just cutting those little tabs that are at the top and bottom of the little tabs for the recovery. Pop that on out. And prior to gluing these together, we're actually going to give them a little bit of a bend because they have to follow the contour of the surface. So I'm going to bend these prior to gluing them, so that way whenever we glue the whole assembly onto the hatch, it goes together much nicer. Okay, so those have a little bit of a bend, and apply a little bit of glue here onto that one, and then I'm going to glue this one right on top of it. So we want to make sure our edges line up as much as possible on this. Squish it together good, get that glue seeping out, and then wipe off all the excess. Once that's complete, we're going to work to make our mark on the hatch where we need to get this tab to line up with. So I'm going to take my ruler here, and I'm going to mark 1/4 inch up from the edge of the hatch as shown. So I'm putting a mark at 1/4 inch. It might be useful to put it closer to the center. And by that I mean it would be useful. So we can see my mark at 1/4 inch there. And then once I'm completed with that, I'm going to apply a little bit of glue right there where we're going to be attaching our little tab for the hatch. Now, from a distance side to side, it's not necessarily critical for us to get it perfectly aligned up side to side. Just get it as close as you can, and that'll be more than adequate for this rocket. All right, so once that's complete, we're going to go in. We want to clean off that excess glue that's seeping out right there from this side of that little tab. And once I've done that, this assembly can be set aside to dry. The next steps that we're going to be taking once this is dry is we're going to actually start attaching our shock cord to our hatch, and then we're going to be finally attaching our parachute to the booster to complete the build of the booster. All right, so now that our hatch has had some time to dry, we're going to move on, and we are going to work on attaching our aramid recovery cord for the booster to our hatch door. So to start this, you need to cut out your paper shock cord anchor out of the instructions, and then we need to loosen up the harness that we neatly stowed away. We're going to set that recovery anchor aside, and I'm going to measure 6 inches down from the from the tip of that cord, and we're going to do the same thing like we did on our elastic. I'm going to do an overhand on a bite. So take that bite and then just tie a simple overhand knot with it. So that allows us to have a loop in our cord, like you see here. Now it's important to make sure that that loop is large enough so that way whenever we go to attach our parachute, that you can get your shroud lines through it. So in my case, I think I'm just a little small on my loop that I made. So I'm going to loosen up my knot just a little bit and then make my loop just a hair bigger. All right, we are good to go now. Our loop's plenty big enough to get our shroud lines through there. And then we are going to work on now attaching our aramid cord to our paper anchor. So let's take a little bit of yellow glue. I'm going to place the aramid cord up to it meets the line between the 2 and the 1. I'm going to put a good generous dot of yellow glue there. I'm going to fold over that 1 onto the 2. You're going to see some glue squeeze out. That's good. We want this to be a good, strong bond. So press that down nicely. And then we'll go and clean up that glue here in just a sec. Now we're going to put another dot of glue on the 3. Same thing. Fold over the folded 1/2. Fold and then press down. Squeeze out that glue, making sure that we're getting a good, firm attachment. Let's get a tissue. Wipe off that excess glue off our mat. Once we have this completed unit here with our recovery attached, I'm going to pull this over. I like to apply my glue on the anchor on the side that I folded over onto. So the side that you can see where like the 2 got folded onto, if that makes sense. I'm going to apply a good drop of glue there. And then it doesn't necessarily matter a huge amount where we mount this shock cord down, but I want it to be about 2 inches down. So I'm going to get a rough idea using my ruler, measure down about 2 inches. Be careful to drip glue like that, but that's okay. I know where about 2 inches is, and then I'm going to press my anchor down firmly till I can see that glue squeeze out. And then we're going to let that dry. During the development of this rocket, I found it quite helpful. Also, if you apply glue over top of your anchor here and like smear it around, it kind of helps protect the paper in case it were to like see any potential flames or anything during the recovery of the booster, which is slim but not a zero chance. This just helps strengthen that anchor just a little bit more. So that's done. We're gonna let that dry now. And then once we've completed that, we're going to finish attaching our parachute, which is the 15-inch nylon. And then we're going to go and follow the steps of attaching the launch lugs in the same way that we attached them on the upper stage. So the next time you see this rocket, we're going to have the parachute attached, just like we attached the 18-inch parachute, and we're going to have those launch lugs already attached at their specific measurement points. And this would then complete the booster assembly. So that concludes the build of the Pro Series 2 Vogel. This rocket is engineered for high-altitude performance, delivering an exciting two-stage flight experience, whether you're launching to 2,000 feet on F motors or reaching even greater heights with Level 1 certification motors. The Vogel is designed to perform. Now it's your turn. Assemble yours, take it to the field, and experience the thrill of high-performance rocketry. Thanks for watching, and as always, fly safe and aim high.